can't necessarily get rid of it all at once. That's a difficult thing for people to do. So in this case, I was visiting someone who only wanted to part with some books. And so we were kind of going shelf by shelf. And there was a shelf of books that were part of what we call the Cranford series. It was a series of reprints done by Macmillan beginning in the 1880s and through the early 1900s that had these gorgeous emerald cloth bindings with elaborate gilt designs on them. They were called Cranford because they were named after the most successful in the early bit of the series, the novel by Elizabeth Gaskell Cranford. And they essentially were a reprint series, of classics from that era, or what they considered classics in that era. But because they were so beautiful, I didn't even look at what the titles were. I just said, we want that whole shelf. And that's my bookseller instinct. Right?
Amazing.
Um, and there is this divide, there are my bookseller instincts, my bookseller book collector, and then there's my reader instincts. And those are distinct things, but they do work together very often, as they did in this case. So I took these books back to the shop, and there was a book in there that I described as essentially the book that changed my life, was just in that stack. I didn't even know it yet. And it was one of these books from the Cranford series, which means that the book that changed my life was a book that I bought solely for the cover.
Wow.
And it was a copy of Frances Burney's book Evelina, published in 1903, I believe, by Macmillan and the illustrator's Hugh Thompson, a very famous edition. And when I was cataloging it for my rare book shop, we catalog things because we're cataloging the individual object, which is different from any other copy of that book. We provide a record of that copy. I was cataloging it, and I was just doing my basic due diligence about the author. And that was when I realized how important Frances Burney was to Jane Austen. Frances Burney uses the phrase Pride and Prejudice in her novel Cecilia more than once, and in a very important kind of climax of the entire novel. And so scholars think that Austen almost certainly got the phrase Pride and Prejudice from Burney. And I didn't know that. And I love Jane Austen so much. I had been reading and rereading her novels over and over again. She died very young. She died at 41, and she only has six completed novels. And so I thought, oh, if only she had lived longer and produced more novels.
Right.
And I didn't think about the fact that she had, in fact, all of these models, all of these women whose books she was reading, who were writing books very similar to hers,
Right.
that I could read as well. And that was the first moment that I had when I would accidentally brought it into my rare bookshop because of a pretty cover. And then I thought, I want to learn more about the favorite author of one of my favorite
Right.
authors.
Right.
And that is what set me off on this entire journey that if you read the book, you'll see it was very transformative for me and how I approach reading, and specifically how, to me, reading is not a separate activity from the rest of life. It is incorporated into how we move through the world.
Right.
And I'm hoping that my book communicates that to readers. But it was absolutely an unintentional turning point, bend in the road that was tied to the serendipity of book collecting, running across the right book at the right time, not intentionally, completely accidentally.
Right. And you've said in the past that you kind of had, I don't know if it's a course correct, but you were so enlightened and shocked that you hadn't been aware of some of these authors,
Yes.
when you were so immersed in Jane's world, and also that these authors were extremely innovative and interesting. They were experimental for that time period.
Yeah.
So if you've read all of the Jane books, all of the six plus, it's not the end of the road. Look at like this entire book that you wrote. It has like I would start with reading your book, and then you're just delving into the work of all of these authors. It's so interesting that Pride and Prejudice, the title, right? It was first called First Impressions, Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice. So that does make sense, doesn't it?
Yes, and in fact, the first version of it, Austen's father offered to the publisher of Frances Burney, and he compared it in his correspondence to the publisher to Evelina. So those connections,
Yeah.
anywhere you look in Austen's career, you will find these connections. And that was what was so astonishing to me is like once you actually have the eyes to look,
Right.
to observe rather than just see, or you actually understand what you're seeing, then those breadcrumbs are everywhere for you to pick up.
Absolutely.
Always there. Yeah, and I think too, one thing that I thought when I first started this project was, well, Austen is remembered and we read her today for a reason. She is great, and she is great. But there are many reasons why books get taught in schools, why they keep being reread, why they keep being picked for TV series and film adaptations. And those are being great is only the first qualification for that. There are all sorts of other things coming into play as well. And so I didn't fully recognize that, I think, when I decided to tackle Evelina. I thought, oh, well, the reason I haven't read this before is because it's not as good as Austen, and that was reason enough not to read it. We only have limited time.
Right.
Then I read Evelina and I loved it. It was so good. And that was, in some ways, its own turning point because I realized that this wasn't some dutiful, oh, I have to rebalance my reading because I had read all of the men she had read, but I hadn't read any of the women. And at first I thought I was, setting up my own lessons and it would feel a little bit like school and education. I was doing it dutifully.
Right.
And then when I read it, I was like, no, actually, Evelina is great.
Right.
And it's great in different ways.
Right.
Austen's writing is great. So it's not an either or, it's a
Right.
yes and.
So it might be like similar themes,
Hmm.
but like her style or some of the other female authors' styles, like does Jane kind of, is she set aside in her own way? You're saying some of these authors are as fine as she is as a,
Absolutely. There are things, in fact, one of the arguments I make in the Radcliffe chapter, and really bring it home in the conclusion, so I won't spoil, but is that there are things that Anne Radcliffe does far, far, far better than Austen.
oh,
And there are things that Austen does better than Radcliffe.
right,
And so in that case, it really just depends on your taste.
right,
You
right,
know, you might prefer Austen's style. You might like that better, and that is fine. But that doesn't mean that Radcliffe is bad.
right,
She really could do things Austen could not. And I think sometimes when we say Austen is so important, we act as if that means everyone else just isn't good, and that's not true.
right. Right. So in the sense, I'm just thinking about, I was at the Morgan Library
Ah,
at the, gosh, at the Jane Austen.
exhibition.
Oh
Mhm.
my gosh, I was just, I could have moved in.
Yes.
Like reading some of your book and looking at those artifacts. I was especially spending time with those original volumes. Like everything was sort of in 3 volumes at the beginning and the subscription and just the way it was all done and just the way she is listed as a lady, as an author at the beginning. I think it was Emma, right? When her
Well,
book,
she was so the first was Sense and Sensibility by a lady.
right,
Yeah. And
right.
then Pride and Prejudice becomes by the author of Sense and Sensibility. Right. Hmm.
It's something else. But it's just so fascinating. And the letters, I was so deeply moved by those letters between her and many people, but of course, especially her sister Cassandra.
Yes.
And that must be something else for you to be kind of immersed in that and those relationships and how she portrays different sisters. You're thinking of Elizabeth Bennet
Yes.
and Jane. There's so many sisters with all different kinds of relationships in her books, but especially a Jane and a Lizzie in Pride and Prejudice. It's just so amazing. Uh,
Right.
but her method of free indirect discourse. So you're talking about things that different authors do very, very well.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of understood what this was, but I didn't know the term.
Hmm.
So I'm just wondering, well, actually, if you could describe the term, this is a way where the narrator and the character are slipping into the dialogue. And I want you to explain that better than I can.
Yeah, so you're still in the third person. You're not saying I did such and such. You're saying the character, Elizabeth Bennet did such and such. And then what happens is that then, even though the narration is technically third person, the perspective of the narrative isn't some neutral force. It is a perspective that is clearly coming from the character who's being described. So there are many examples of this in Jane Austen that Austen is quite a subtle writer, and a lot of the subtleties of meaning come through her use of free and direct discourse.
Right, right.
Mhm.
But then you feel like so much more intimately connected with the author. You're getting the emotion, like with Elizabeth and Darcy, you're getting that horrified feeling when she realizes that, oh my gosh, I was wrong too all of this time. And you're in her head. And then what's so interesting in the film adaptations, if you have a good one, if the actor can actually portray that, because you're almost, if you're familiar with the book, you're sensing in your head just by the actor's expression. You know, it just takes
Yeah.
it. It's very meta. It's wonderful.
No, that's actually a very interesting comparison because it's true. There's the viral moment in the 2005 adaptation of Pride and Prejudice is after Mr. Darcy has, gotten Elizabeth Bennet into the carriage, and then there is that quick
Oh,
moment where it shows his hand flexing, and
unbelievable.
we don't hear him say, he doesn't say, "I was moved,"
Right,
Instead, we see the hand flexing, and that's sort of the film equivalent of free and direct discourse.
right, exactly.
And we actually see that there are predecessors of Austen who were very good with that exact type of free and direct discourse too. So one of my chapters is about Elizabeth Inchbald, who came from a theater background. She was a successful playwright. And so similarly, the idea of gestures communicating meaning beyond what someone is actually saying.
Right, right.
And she brought that into her own novels. You can see very much that Darcy moment.
Yes,
There's a famous moment in her novel Simple Story where the crush comes into the room and the heroine starts playing her cards badly. They're at a card game and suddenly she's misplacing cards.
right, right.
You don't have to say that she was suddenly thinking about him and not thinking about the game. That shows it,
Right,
right?
exactly.
Mhm.
It seems like the characters that have more depth are the ones that are getting the privilege of the subtlety, whereas
Yeah,
the other ones like Lydia and all of the over the top character and Mrs. Bennet, I mean, God bless them all, but survival, right? They're
that's
just
true.
so broad. They're so broad and not quite as nuanced, even when they have a come down. But the characters are that are more subtle and have a very significant interior life seem to get
Right.
more of that, which is something. I'm going to play a quick clip from that 2005 amazing Pride and Prejudice. I know a lot of people love the BBC. I love that one too. Was that from 95 or 93
Yeah.
or six?
95. She
But
was.
the Keira Knightley and Judi Dench are in this scene, and it's when Lady Catherine de Bourgh and they kind of the screenwriter kind of changed the order of things, but that's fine. It was very effective. But when she's threatened by the idea that her nephew Darcy might propose to Lizzie, and she basically has her own daughter, set for Darcy, lifelong engagement plans. But basically, she's coming to the house. She goes late at night and just basically interrupts the whole family at bedtime, and she gets Lizzie alone. And this is the clip. It still scares the stuffing out of me. So I just find that this is so interesting because it's Lizzie's self-possession. She is absolutely not in the seat of power at all. She doesn't have the position. Um, but she has like just the way she expresses herself that she's basically saying, I am only resolved to act in that manner, which will, in my own opinion, constitute my happiness without reference to you or any person so wholly unconnected with me. And I mean, that sounds very risky and rude given the circumstances. Maybe she could have done something a little bit more subtle with that. But um, that I think is a remarkable scene. And tell me what you thought, either in the book or the film, about that.
Yeah, I think that moment in the film especially shows what we see in the book, but sort of teased out to be more of a highlight, which is Elizabeth Bennet's mettle,
Right.
right? METT.
Yes, yes.
She has a real, let's actually take the pun. She has sort of a steel like for her spirit.
Right.
She, in fact, will draw a line. And this is something that I've always really loved about Austen's writing is that she brings the supreme confidence to her writing that you see in her prose, in her discipline, in how she characterizes people, in how she structures her plots.
Right.
And Elizabeth Bennet is, I think, probably the greatest fruition of that, of someone who shows all the great sides of Austen, both her wit and her ability to kind of have a broader picture and be amused and self-aware in some ways, while also having that supreme confidence and sense of oneself that is unmoving.
Absolutely.
In that way, yeah, I don't think that the heroine gets better than Elizabeth Bennet.
No, I totally agree. Because even with her own family, her father was her great love, but he wasn't as proactive. He adored her, but he wasn't. He was just overwhelmed by the circumstances. So
Mhm.
she had to advocate for her own self in every way. And speaking of that, when you think of her own father, right, Jane Austen's father, he really respected her and Cassandra and the two sons, right? It seems like he provided Cassandra and Jane with the writing and the like. Cassandra was an artist, right? She
Yes.
paints it.
Mhm.
So he like that was such a sense of respect, and her brothers respected her as well. So it seems like even though they didn't have a lot of money, they were, comfortable enough not to. It's not. I think of Virginia Woolf with the room of one's own. That seems to be such a luxury. Like,
Yes.
um,
No, that is a huge point of the context of Austen. Austen may never have become Jane Austen as we know her today if she did not have a supportive environment where all of her siblings and her parents encouraged her in literary activities. And she had the space to do that. No one discouraged her. She, even after her father died, she was living in a house that her brother Edward had provided for her and her sister and her mother. And all of that set the stage, gave her the room of her own that she needed in order to write those novels at Chawton Cottage. And if we didn't have that support, we may never have had Austen, which is not to say that we owe them for Austen. Austen still created those works herself. But it makes you wonder how many other Austens there could have been if other women in that era had received more support, because that was definitely a factor on the ground for a lot of the women's a novelist that she was reading earlier is how much support or not that they had from family members. Anne Radcliffe, for example, was completely supported by her husband, start to finish, as a novelist. And who knows what her career would have been like. She skyrocketed to fame. That may never have happened if she didn't have that support. So the material conditions of an author absolutely affect what an author produces. It is not as simple as the artist is, inspired and must write it down. How we live affects what we write down, when, and how.
absolutely. It's good that she was able to, like I think at the beginning of Sense and Sensibility, she so aptly like described what it was like when the father dies in this, or in Pride and Prejudice, like, they just, the women cannot be heirs. And then the cousin comes in, or the brother who's no longer connected comes in. And that funny scene when the brother and sister-in-law at the very beginning are basically discussing the allowance they're going to give to the sisters and the mother. And it goes down and down and down and down.
That's one of my favorite scenes in Sense and Sensibility.
It's so funny. It's horrifying.
Right.
It's absolutely, and you see them scale down and go to this tiny house, and just the way it's all described. And it's just brilliant, though. So she was really able to feel that. It's in every novel. It's like the desperation for women of literally making some very bad choices, literally just for survival. But
Right.
I love Charlotte in Pride and Prejudice when she's describing to Lizzie why she married Collins. Right? He's the most
Yes.
horrible character. It's like, I don't have the luxury. I'm not beautiful like you. I'm not all of this. I basically, she's almost disregarding him, but I have the beautiful home and hopefully children. And I really have all, romance is a luxury I can't afford, basically. But the
Right.
way Jane describes that is so beautiful and touching.
Because she knew firsthand these choices.
Right.
She understood that something that I think often gets lost when we talk about what we call romance novels. Romance novels are never solely about love between individuals. Romance novels are always, just like an author doesn't write outside of their context, the same goes for relationships and the choices that we make. And in Austen's time, there were so many more economic limitations for women, particularly of Austen's class,
Mhm.
which is to say, the women who are writing who are of a genteel class and they are not working. There are Austen, employed servants. So she was not working class. She was of the class that employed servants. However, in her family, she would not have been able to take on a job as a servant. She was very limited in the ways that she could make money, and she was also therefore very limited in the ways that she could provide herself, at least in terms of the restrictions that she would have faced culturally and even in the smaller unit of her own family. Her brothers would never let her do that. They would completely provide for her before that. But other women didn't have those choices. They didn't have those opportunities. And so they had to make it work the best they can. And some of the women in my book and Jane Austen's bookshelf really did have to work to make money, and that affected what they wrote. And others were more like Austen, where they could write what they liked because they had the support. And all of that affects what we see. Romance novels are truly a reflection of the how women work within limitations, how they find freedom, power, and agency within the fact that they are circumscribed by context, circumstance, or culture.
Right, right. And like how many of the characters are able to be real people? Like I'm thinking of the authors that you studied for your book. Even if those some of the writers didn't have the means, like Radcliffe did, do you think most of them were like experiencing a writer's life from a very early age, like through books and then scribbling some notes and trying, or even verbally?
So yes and no. For example, there are I believe three women in the book who did need to write for money. The first was essentially orphaned when she was a teenager, and she was the reason she became a writer is because she was precocious as a poet as a teenager. She would came up with verses, and everyone was like, "Wow, this young kid does this amazing thing." And so she quickly realized she got patronage from that. She quickly realized that this was the talent that she had at her disposal in order to make money, which she had to do. So that's Charlotte Lennox. And then you have Elizabeth Inchbald, who was a farmer's daughter, completely unschooled, and everything she learned was by self-education. And she just through sheer hard work in conjunction with innate ability, which is to say, to be able to even create a sort of school plan, a syllabus for oneself is a big deal. She was able, through application and revising and coming to terms with her errors and learning to be self-made.
Right.
And that was, again, like she was not, there was no education there. There was nothing. That all came from inside for her.
Okay. Yeah.
And then Charlotte Smith is the other person who she was raised wealthy and she was highly, highly educated as a wealthy young woman. And it was only after she fell on hard times because her husband spent all of their money that she said, "Well, what do I have at my disposal in order to make money?" She's like, I don't know any trades. I don't know how to like, sew clothing or anything, but I did receive a really great education, so I'm going to use that in order to become a writer. So those are actually three kind of different approaches, depending on the different circumstances. And you can see how in each case, though, the writing itself was the means by which that they were able to take things into their own control,
Right. Right.
just not insignificant in this era.
It was like that she had the opportunity then to write about people from the two different classes, like starting up here and then falling on hard times and having that perspective.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Oh my gosh. I love the way Elizabeth Gilbert has a quote on your book. Jane Austen's bookshelf has everything a reader could desire: wit, passion, mystery, brilliant detective work, a love of rare books, a deep dive into literary history, and best of all, the restoration of reputation for a group of great women authors whose names should never have been forgotten. And like, you've got to feel good about yourself with this book. And books are phenomenal. The flap copy, it's like page-turning literary adventure, and it's not just an introduction, but it does. It's powerful what you're able to do as a bookseller and as an author who's made this great discovery. And like you've humbled yourself too to say, "Oh my gosh, like look at this, look how rich this is," and
Right.
helping us discover these authors too and these connections. So it's really wonderful. So no, let's get into your amazing. So I said earlier, I was just completely taken with your just your work in general. Like it's let's see here, where have I been start? There was a wonderful article in the New York Times in 2022 called
Mm.
Meet the New Old Book Collectors. And it was wonderful. And you're in very good company there. But I wanted to ask, I want to hear about how you collect books too, but I wanted to just start with this section when you were at the New York International Antiquarian Book Fair at the Armory on Park Avenue in the city, in New York City. And you were telling a story. You withdrew a copy of Allen Ginsberg's Howl, Kaddish, and Other Poems from your display case. And I want you to I love the whole concept of marginalia that you talk about. Can you tell us what you described in this article about what you found in that copy?
Yeah. So what we're referring to, I'll just give a little bit of context. In book collecting, we are looking at each individual book as a historical artifact, and it tells the story of not only its creation at that moment, but books. are much older than us. They have lived many more lives than we have. And when there is evidence of those past lives in the book, past owners, we call that provenance. So I am always interested in looking for provenance markings from previous owners in books because it tells you about the life of that book and it might also tell you a little bit about that person. And in the case of the book you're talking about, so we had purchased a massive amount of books from the library of Amy Winehouse. And when we had purchased them, they were at an auction, and the descriptions were just, oh, here's the sort of title and author, and that's about it. And there was, a pictured show if it was paperback or hardcover. But when we acquired the books, we saw, in fact, that she had been annotating many of them, that she had been writing in the notes in many different ways. And so the copy that I had pulled out at the New York Fair was a copy of Allen Ginsberg's some of his poems, but particularly his big one. So Howl, Howl is one of the most important poems of the 20th century. It is a landmark in the countercultural movement in gay rights. It is a very much before and after type of poem. So it makes sense that she would be engaging with it. She writes lyrics. This is just a very slight jump to the left in terms of medium. And she across the page starts writing lyrics to a brainstormed song this is an unpublished song. We couldn't find any example of this actually turning into a song. She's drafting her own original song right there next to Allen Ginsberg's poetry. And then there's also a brainstorm next to it of different rhymes for the lines that she's trying to do. So you also see her process of, oh, I really like this line. Now, what is a word that would rhyme with that? And how can I create the next line from that? You actually see her strategy for approaching songwriting, all of that right next to and on top of the work she is reading while she's working on those lyrics. So you get this almost palimpsest-like experience of seeing artists responding to each other. It becomes this interesting dialogue that can grow into something new. And it is uniquely Amy Winehouse, that's her, but she doesn't mean that she doesn't have influences around her that she's responding to.
Right, right,
Something like that is so meaningful because it shows in how personal books are and how one's book collection, the books on one's shelf,
right,
are very much an autobiography on your shelf, where you got them, how you responded to them when you read them. Maybe you haven't even read them yet and you want to. All of that is reflecting your life
right,
uniquely.
right, right. That's so I wonder like I am absolutely like you where it is my autobiography and I have when I commuted to the city I read so much of course during that time and it was like all of the classics and then all the and I have my name even how my name has changed over the years and the year and then it brings me right back. Other people are not quite the same, but I absolutely get that. And with marginalia, like you talk about, it's really not a bad thing to write in the margins too. Like obviously you're not going to do that with a rare book, but there are really wonderful notes that you found along the way. There was one about Bettina, a former owner.
Oh, yes. Yeah, I can talk about that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So to be clear, I write in my own books when
Yeah.
I read
In
them.
pencil, you said though, right?
In
Pencil.
pencil.
Yeah.
So I have two main rules that follow essentially modern conservation practice of don't do anything that can't be undone. So that's why I write in pencil. But then the other rule for me is that it's just books that are contemporary to me in my lifetime. So if it was
Yeah.
published within my lifetime, then I will be writing it. And otherwise, I keep a separate document of notes that I still keep with the book. I just
Right.
don't write in the book. And that's my particular boundaries. Other people can do it as they want, but if they're kind of thinking about ways that they want to approach marginalia, those are some ideas for you.
Right.
And then the reason why this can be so evocative and why I like it so much and encourage people to do it is this example you were just citing. So I mentioned already that Frances Burney's book, she has a novel called Cecilia that's almost certainly where Austen got the phrase Pride and Prejudice. So when I am a book collector, I'm thinking, okay, well, I know I need a copy of Cecilia in my Jane Austen bookshelf collection, unquestionably. I know I need that title. But because I'm a book collector, it's not just the title. It is a copy of the book,
Right.
a single copy. So which copy is the right copy? That's the question that a book collector asks.
Right.
So I was waiting for the right copy, and I picked a copy that was actually quite beat up, which normally on the collectible marketplace does not help its marketplace value. But the reason I wanted this beat up copy was because it had marginalia from a previous owner explaining its condition issues. So a woman named Bettina, we know her name was Bettina because she wrote her name, her owner inscription, in the books. She was probably the first owner of this book because she dated it from the 1780s, which is when Cecilia was published. And then in the last two volumes, there are these pink reddish stains on the volumes, on the leaves, and as well as on the bindings. And again, normally from a collector's standpoint, you would think, oh, that I would want to stay away from that. But in my case, that's why I purchased it, because Bettina explains where those stains come from. She says, by accident, a strawberry fell onto the book, which has stained the leaves. And so you can imagine this Bettina, she is reading this book. These are volumes 4 and 5, by the way. This is a very long book, and she's at the very end of it. And clearly she is not stopping to eat. She is like wanting to finish this book. So she is sitting down eating while she is reading, and that leads to the accident. And so it is this very human moment that also gives you a sense of how Frances Burney was read rapturously in the 1780s when her book first came out.
That's amazing. And people like when they actually do write notes, have you come across any other notes like that where you're seeing the relationship? Like here, you're definitely seeing a part of a relationship with Bettina in this book. But
Yes.
notes people are writing to themselves, or even punctuation, or like,
Well, or disagreement.
right,
In a lot of my own books, I will write in notes where I'm agreeing like very strongly or disagreeing very strongly, like, no way, you know? And I love that too, because what you're seeing is someone who is responding to
right,
the work, right? And that's what I'm really interested in. What's so hard to study in book history, in the scholarship of book history, is reader response. Like we know how big critics were responding. Their works were published in newspapers, right? Or even in essay collections. But how is the average reader responding to some great hit? That's what I
right,
want to know. And that's
right.
so hard to trace.
Absolutely. So I wanted to talk a little bit about your Instagram account. And the great thing about this is the topics are all over the map. If you just look at the thumbnails for, say, the last 30 of your posts, there's, Pat the Bunny and of Mice and Men and, early editions with all the guilt and everything you were describing. So I want you to tell me about a few of those, but I'm going to quickly play um, the real, I think it was called Poison Book, and you're literally describing poison in the book. So we'll play that. Okay, so tell us about that. And if you want to just, you want to tell us anything else about putting these reels together and how you choose your topics, because there is nothing you don't describe here. And you have, before you even answer that, I have to say one of the resounding comments, and the people definitely comment. They're very engaged. They cannot get over how enthusiastic you are, like incredibly skilled, and you know your stuff inside and out. But you are just describing it with such enthusiasm and passion, and like, oh my gosh, like I can't wait to share this with you. And I think that's what's so compelling about it, in addition to obviously what you're speaking about.
Right. Yeah, no, I do love what I do, and I try to communicate that because a big part of what I'm always thinking about is, these are things that I feel very strongly about, but that doesn't mean other people feel that way. I am asking a lot of people to ask for their time and attention. And this is the case for the Jane Austen bookshelf book as well as for Reels. I am asking something of you. I'm asking for your time, which is incredibly valuable. So for me, I always am trying to answer the question, why should I care? How can I get people to care about the things that matter to me? That's fundamentally what I'm doing. And so I have essentially two different ways that I approach the topics for my videos. The poison books reel is a good example of the first category, which is it's essentially in response to either popular understandings of rare books or common questions, and essentially just trying to educate about the world of rare books.
Right.
People will ask, I don't wear white gloves for the most part when I handle books. One of the few times I would wear gloves is if I'm handling books that are poison books, so called, which in that context means arsenical bindings for the most part. So in the 19th century, in particular period, from particular publishers, you do see arsenic being used to create that bright green color of a lot of cloth bindings. And that means that therefore that's traces of arsenic can actually get on your fingers and things and are poison. And so you don't want to be like licking your fingers, for example. And so that is a just a kind of a small niche in the rare book world, but it touches into bigger questions. Why don't you normally use gloves? Why do you use it for this? How much of a danger is there? And so I do like to, as much as possible, give people a window onto this world that can feel very, very niche. It can feel very intimidating because these are rare books. They're expensive or they're old or they're just not things you see every day. And I want to lower the bar for that. I want people to feel like they're welcome in this space, that they can ask questions, and that it is within their ability to learn more if they're interested in it. So that's an entire genre of videos I do. And then the other type of videos I do are simply this is so cool, I have to show you
Right,
this,
right. Yeah.
which comes from my work in my antiquarian bookshop, right? So I'm having books come in on a daily basis. I'm cataloging them, I'm selling them, and I just pick the books as they're coming through that I'm like, oh, there's something really cool about this that I think other people would also find amazing. And so it is just, in some ways, it's almost like a pitch. I'm being
Right,
a bookseller in many ways. But that's why I am good at what I do, frankly, is because when I'm selling, I am not selling in a cynical way. I'm selling things that I believe are great.
right. And
And
this, yeah, the story behind these books is what you're saying.
yes, yes, I am compelled by this. I think other people would be interested in this, so I'm going to tell you about it. And those are my two genres, and I do try to balance them as much as I can, but it is very much based on, as you say, enthusiasm and a genuine passion for the material. And because I have that passion for the material, and because these books have been so transformative in my life, I do become something of a an evangelist for them, and I say, no, I want you to be able to experience the same thing, and I don't want you to feel like you're getting caught on barriers of how do I learn this? Oh, it's not for me. This is intimidating. Whatever. I want to make it feel accessible and welcoming through my sort of FAQ type
Yeah,
videos.
no, that's perfect on the and right on the head there, nail on the head. And I think a lot of people respond directly. Like when I saw some of those, like the Pat the Bunny and Of Mice and Men, but the when you talked about the J.D. Salinger, the first paperback edition of Catcher in the Rye, and when I was in college, one of my friends gave me that as a birthday gift. It's
Oh,
like from a long time ago. It was a really, and I still have it on my shelf. It's unbelievable. And then when I saw that, you told a story about how J.D. Salinger hated that book cover, and
yeah.
then and how that hating that cover evolved into his right the new brand for his other books.
Yes, so those just typographic, essentially a field of white with
Right.
just the maybe
Franny
a
and
dash.
Zoe. That's it.
Yes, Franny's Way, that's it.
Right.
And that it does kind of give you that big aha of, oh, that's why his later books look that way. But that example is a good example too of how I distinguish between a reader and collector. I am, of course, both, and many people are both. But a reader is interested in the story in the book. You
Right.
want to read Catcher in the Rye,
Right.
and a collector is interested in the story of the book.
Right.
Oh, this paperback edition was the one that led to the design change for all of the rest of his
Right.
books.
Right. And then the international versions too, like at the Austin exhibit, the Morgan, they had a whole wall of international covers, and
Yes.
the Italian one was wild. Lizzie had like red hair and lipstick, like completely from what we would imagine, but it all kind of does reflect the culture. It's fascinating.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's wonderful. Okay, and before we leave, I have to ask one of the best things I'd love to ask people is, what do you reach for when you need some hope?
This is going to be the most obvious of answers based on this entire conversation. But for me, when I need some hope, when I need some comfort, I have reached for the books that I love. And I mean, it's obvious, but this is also another reason why I collect. It's not that I am trying to acquire and then those books are just on my shelf as trophies. That's not how I respond to them. They I curate my environment to be surrounded by things that have meaning to me.
Right.
And then, on days when I am lacking in hope, I will review those books. I will pull them off because they are those reliable friends for me that I know that if I go there, it will give me a little bit of boost. It doesn't fix everything, but it does give me a moment that I can breathe.
Oh, that's wonderful. And there's thousands of people on your shelves, thousands.
Yes.
Dare I even ask how you catalog your personal shelves? I shouldn't ask that.
No, I do have some spreadsheets and things for my personal bookshelves. It is not nearly as intense, obviously, as what I do for my profession. So I don't think that much of it,
Right,
honestly, it
right.
doesn't seem
Yeah,
like that much work because I enjoy, again, I enjoy that work.
right,
It's
right.
not exactly it's not exactly suffering to create a spreadsheet for my collections. I enjoy
But
that.
you know where all of your personal ones are. You can just go
Yes.
right there. Absolutely.
Mhm.
So what I want to we're going to put all these notes in the show notes, like your website. Tell us the best place to find you, your website and your Instagram, and anything about what you're doing now in it. And I'm sure mainly it's your work and promoting this wonderful book, but tell us how we can find you out there.
Yeah, so if you are interested in the rare book side of things, then you'll want to go to my company website, which is typepunchmatrix.com. And that is where you can see the books that we have that are browsable and available. If you're interested in more, say, my writings as an author, then you'd want to go just to RebeccaRomney.com, which is my personal author site, essentially. And then, similarly, the place where I am most active right now is on Instagram and TikTok. Those you can find me at Rebecca.Romney on Instagram and Rebecca Romney on TikTok. And at the moment, I'm posting there pretty frequently, so that is where I'm spending most of my time online if you want to connect. And again, as you've seen, as you've heard, I do like the FAQ type videos. So if there are questions that you have, throw them in the comments field because that's often where I source my ideas for the videos. Someone say, how do I find a book in an estate sale? And I say, well, here are some ways to look for one. So that is a great way to connect to find me that way.
That's great. And you had responded to somebody's comment. I think you were referencing an Indian word or name, and then somebody in the comments said, "Oh, it's pronounced such and such," and you were just like, "Oh my gosh, I was wondering about that. Thanks so much!" Exclamation.
Yeah.
It was just fantastic because we're all just constantly learning, and it's so. I think I probably mispronounced the one of your the Principia. Is it
Oh yeah, Principia is what we were
Principia?
talking.
I'm going to have to read
Mhm.
that.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah, I think, especially as people who, are readers, it is very common for us to mispronounce things we've only ever read. So there's
yes, yes,
that.
yeah,
And for me, yeah, I don't mind being corrected if I'm wrong, If I am, if some, what does happen, as you, of course, I'm sure you have experienced, there are many times when people correct you and they are not, in fact, right. And you kind of feel like, where is that coming from then? Because that's not coming from a desire really to
right,
be
right.
truthful. But in cases where it is well meant and it's something I legitimately did not know, yeah, my response is I hope
Yeah,
warm and welcoming. I can't always say that I am at my best online, but you did
it's a
find
good
one where I
tone.
was,
It's a really good
okay.
tone. Yeah. Rebecca, thank you so much for all of your time, for the gift of this book and your work. It's absolutely compelling. And as I said, we'll put everything in the show notes. So I really hope our listeners will do the deep dive and go down the rabbit hole that I've gone down because it's a great place to be.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the engaging conversation and hopefully people get a much expanded TBR.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.